Good evening and welcome to our special report from Copenhagen, where the leaders of the European Union have gathered for what many are already describing as a pivotal summit for Europe's collective security and defence. At the heart of the discussions is the war in Ukraine, now entering another grinding winter, and the question of how Europe can not only sustain Kyiv's resistance, but also transform its own military posture for an era of prolonged geopolitical tension. The summit is being hosted here in the Danish capital, and one of the first leaders to arrive this morning was French President Emmanuel Macron. His words at the doorstep to the meeting set the tone for what lies ahead. Macron underlined two priorities that he believes can no longer be delayed. First, consolidating the coalition of nations supporting Ukraine with operational and financial resources. And second, pushing forward the long-debated project of building a truly European defence architecture, one that is not simply reliant on NATO or on the United States, but one that equips Europe itself with new capabilities, as he put it. In a brief but pointed doorstep statement, President Macron reminded journalists that this summit is not business as usual. He emphasised that the member states would review what the so-called coalition of the willing has achieved so far in supplying Ukraine with ammunition, air defence systems and long-range strike capabilities. They would also take stock of how effectively the joint financial commitments are being translated into real battlefield assistance. Macron framed this as an essential first step to keep Ukraine in the fight and to demonstrate that European promises are being delivered. Equally important in his view is the second theme, the one that reaches beyond the immediate war. He argued that Europe must invest in its own long-term security by developing new defence capacities, more advanced air defence networks, modernised land forces, secure satellite communications, cyber resilience, and the industrial base to sustain all of these. Macron highlighted the SAFE programme, the Security Action for Europe initiative, under which member states have agreed to extend exceptional joint loans to fund major defence projects with a distinctly European preference. This, he pointed out, was until recently a political taboo. Many governments were reluctant to pool borrowing authority for defence spending or to prioritise European-made equipment. But, he said, the war in Ukraine has changed the strategic calculation. For Macron, the SAFE programme is not just a financial tool, but a symbolic shift. A statement that Europe is willing to act collectively in areas once considered too sensitive for joint action. In his words, Europe is equipping itself with new capabilities that will give it a credible voice and real weight in its own security affairs. The context of these remarks is crucial. Since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, the European Union has approved multiple packages of military and macro-financial support for Kyiv. But it has also faced criticism for slow procurement, uneven delivery of promised artillery shells, and over-dependence on non-European suppliers for critical systems. The SAFE programme, according to Macron and several of his closest allies, is intended to accelerate both production and procurement within Europe, strengthening the continent's own defence industry while ensuring that frontline needs are met. Here in Copenhagen, the mood among the delegates is serious. The Danish hosts have underscored that this summit comes at a time when Ukrainian forces are bracing for another winter campaign while facing shortages of ammunition and air defence interceptors. At the same time, European publics are showing signs of fatigue after more than 3 years of high energy prices, disrupted supply chains and mounting fiscal pressures. The leaders gathered here know that to sustain public support for further aid, they must show that Europe's spending is effective, coordinated and forward-looking. That is why Macron's insistence on coupling immediate support for Ukraine with longer-term investments in Europe's own capabilities is resonating so strongly. Observers note that Macron's doorstep comments also reflect a broader strategic ambition he has voiced for years, the idea of European strategic autonomy. While he has consistently reaffirmed France's commitment to NATO, he has argued that Europe cannot forever outsource its security to Washington. The ongoing war and the political debates in the United States about future support for Kyiv have lent new urgency to that argument. Throughout the day, officials have been discussing concrete steps to operationalize these ideas. Among them are proposals to expand joint procurement of munitions, to finance new air defence networks that could be deployed rapidly along Europe's eastern flank, to pool research and development for next-generation drones and counter-drone technologies, and to create common stockpiles of critical equipment. A particular focus is on bridging the gap between commitments and delivery, ensuring that what is pledged in Brussels or Copenhagen actually reaches Ukrainian units in time to make a difference on the battlefield. In his short address to the cameras, Macron made it clear that the SAFE programme is one of the summit's centrepieces. He described it as a collective effort to overcome the piecemeal, nationally fragmented approach to defence investment that has long plagued Europe. By leveraging joint borrowing and procurement, the EU hopes to achieve both economies of scale and strategic cohesion. He also highlighted the political significance of breaking the old taboo about giving preference to European manufacturers. For decades, many EU governments avoided such language for fear of protectionist backlash or friction with allies. But the war, Macron suggested, has underscored the need for Europe to strengthen its own industrial base so that it is not entirely dependent on US or Asian suppliers in a crisis. This summit, therefore, is not just about another round of funding or aid announcements. It is about the broader transformation of Europe's defence posture. Analysts here say the discussions in Copenhagen may mark the beginning of a shift from reactive measures, scrambling to support Ukraine, to a more proactive strategy that anticipates future threats and builds capacity accordingly. The images captured as Macron arrived this morning tell their own story. The French president, stepping briskly onto the blue-carpeted entrance of the summit venue, greeted officials and moved straight to the waiting microphones. Behind him, the EU flags fluttered in the brisk Scandinavian breeze, a reminder that this is very much a European moment. As he spoke in French, with translators relaying his message to the international press corps, Macron was both candid and insistent. He acknowledged that the coalition of the willing had made progress, but said plainly that more had to be done in operational planning, in financing, and in ensuring that commitments translate into real action. The Copenhagen summit is also being watched closely in Kyiv. Ukrainian officials have repeatedly urged European partners to step up deliveries of long-range strike systems, air defence missiles, and especially artillery shells. They argue that without a steady flow of such supplies, their ability to hold the line against renewed Russian offensives will be at risk. The decisions taken in Copenhagen could therefore have a direct impact on the course of the war in the coming months. For the host country, Denmark, the summit is both a logistical challenge and a diplomatic opportunity. Danish leaders have sought to highlight their country's own contributions to Ukraine's defence, including substantial arms donations and training programmes, as well as to position Copenhagen as a hub for collective European security efforts. The summit venue, with its tight security and packed schedule of bilateral and plenary sessions, underscores the seriousness with which the EU is approaching these deliberations. Commentators note that Macron's push for deeper European defence integration is not without controversy. Some member states worry that an emphasis on EU-level initiatives could duplicate or compete with NATO's established structures. Others are cautious about the idea of common borrowing for military purposes, fearing fiscal or political backlash at home. Nonetheless, the French president's message today suggests that he believes the political moment is ripe for bold steps, that the combination of the ongoing war, the evident security challenges, and the lessons of the past 2 years have created an opening for Europe to move beyond incrementalism. As the day's agenda unfolds, leaders are expected to debate not only the immediate next steps for supporting Ukraine, but also the parameters of a more permanent European defence framework. They will discuss how to balance national sovereignty with collective responsibility, how to finance big-ticket projects without overburdening already strained budgets, and how to maintain public support for policies that require sacrifice and patience. The conversation here in Copenhagen will not resolve all these issues overnight, but the symbolism of leaders gathered in a northern European capital, just a few hundred miles from the Baltic Sea and from regions where Russian military provocations have become routine, underscores what is at stake. Europe's leaders know that the decisions they make, or fail to make, will reverberate not only on the front lines in Ukraine, but across the entire continent for years to come. For viewers following this summit, Macron's doorstep statement offers a concise guide to the stakes. Support for Ukraine must be sustained and made more effective, and Europe must take real steps toward building the capabilities it needs to defend itself in an increasingly dangerous world. The SAFE programme, controversial though it may be in some quarters, represents one concrete mechanism for doing so. As the summit proceeds, the focus will remain on whether Europe's leaders can convert today's words into lasting commitments and whether they can summon the political will to invest in their own security. For now, though, the message from Copenhagen is clear. The era of relying on others for Europe's defence is drawing to a close, and leaders like Emmanuel Macron are pressing their colleagues to seize this moment to act.
Bonjour à vous. Écoutez, d'abord nos travaux seront dédiés au soutien à l'Ukraine et à l'Europe de la défense. Deux sujets essentiels sur lesquels nous avons beaucoup poussé, ce qui permettra de faire le point sur les travaux de la coalition des volontaires, sur l'action que nous menons au soutien de l'Ukraine, sur les initiatives que nous voulons prendre aussi d'un point de vue opérationnel et financier. Et puis ensuite, il y a le développement d'une Europe de la défense. On s'est doté de capacités nouvelles avec ces prêts exceptionnels que nous sommes collectivement prêts à faire pour soutenir des programmes de défense, programme dit SAFE, avec une préférence européenne, ce qui était un tabou jusque-là.